40 below zero, axes splintered like ice, and men fought exhaustion before sunrise, all for the promise of moving timber through America's harshest winters. In 1901, when blizzards buried entire loads and frost made steel brittle, loggers raced against nature's worst with nothing but muscle and desperate ingenuity. Why risk everything? And how did they transform frozen wilderness into highways of ice? That story begins before dawn. Before the sun even thought of rising, men stumbled from their bunks, boots crunching on floors colder than the river outside. The air inside those rough-hewn bunkhouses bit just as hard as the darkness beyond the door. Out in the woods, the world was locked in place by cold so deep it could crack a man's breath in his throat. At 40 below zero, wool mittens stiffened, and the sweat on a logger's brow froze before it ever had a chance to drip. The day's work began long before daylight, because the only thing more relentless than the cold was the schedule. Logging did not wait for comfort. In these northern forests, the ground had to be frozen solid. Only then could teams drag timber without sinking into mud. That meant winter was the season of opportunity and of punishment. Every hour counted. Crews would rise in the blackness, guided by the faint glow of kerosene lanterns, and march out into a world where the snow squeaked underfoot like dry sand, and the trees themselves seemed brittle with frost. The cold was not just a backdrop. It was the first and last thing every man felt. Faces burned raw, eyelashes rimed with ice, fingers numb even inside thick wool. The wind sliced through layers of clothing, finding every gap. Horses huddled in their stalls, breath steaming, waiting for the day's first haul. Even the tools, steel and iron, turned against their owners. At these temperatures, an axe could shatter just as easily as the ice it struck. But the frozen ground was a blessing in disguise. Only when the earth was hard as granite could sleigh runners glide, carrying logs that weighed as much as a house. The men knew their time was short. As soon as the thaw came, the roads would vanish and the forest would claim back its secrets. So they worked with a kind of urgency that left no room for weakness. Every day was a race against the cold, the clock, and the land itself. Steel flashed in the half-light, axes rising and falling in a rhythm older than the men who swung them. Each blow sent a jolt through shoulders and wrists, the cold biting deeper with every swing. The crosscut saw, a two-man beast of a tool, demanded cooperation. One logger pulled, the other pushed, teeth biting into frozen spruce and pine, sawdust spilling like snow. Breath turned to ice crystals, clinging to mustaches and scarves. The air rang with the clang of steel against wood, and sometimes a sharper sound, a crack as brittle metal met sap colder than iron. In this weather, even the best forged tools could betray their owners. An axe head trusted for years might shatter on a knot, sending shards skittering across the crusted snow. Fingers stiffened around wooden handles, numb but refusing to let go. Every swing was a gamble. Limbs overhead, heavy with snow, waited for the wrong vibration. The men called them widowmakers, branches dead and hidden in the canopy, ready to drop without warning. One careless moment, a misjudged cut, and a ton of wood could come crashing down. No one talked much about it, but everyone watched the treetops before laying in the saw. Eyes flicked upward, scanning for danger, even as arms and backs kept working. The forest echoed with the sound of labor, axes thudding, saws rasping. The occasional curse as a tool slipped or a log rolled the wrong way. Each tree felled was a small victory, but the work never slowed. The cold made everything harder. Steel grew brittle, ropes stiffened, and the snow muffled cries for help. Yet the men pressed on, muscles burning, knowing that every log had to be moved before the thaw. The real challenge still lay ahead, hauling these giants out of the woods across miles of frozen wilderness. But first, the timber had to fall, and the men had to outlast both the forest and the winter itself. At 2 in the morning, while most of the camp tried to steal a few more hours of sleep, another crew pulled on their frozen boots and stepped out into the blackness. These were the men of the water team, led by a foreman whose face was as weathered as the bark on the pines. Lanterns swung from mittened hands, casting shaky halos across the snow as the crew made their way down to the creek, breath clouding the air. The cold was so sharp it seemed to slice through every layer. The job was simple in theory, brutal in practice. They flooded the logging roads with water so the surface would freeze into a slick, glassy highway by morning. Each man wrestled a heavy barrel or a sprinkler sled, the metal biting through wool gloves. They hacked holes through creek ice, filled the tanks, then hauled them back by horse or by hand, careful not to slip near the open water. The foreman checked the route, lantern light flickering over ruts and ridges, making sure every stretch would be ready for the day's loads. The water had to be spread evenly, layer by layer. A missed spot meant a soft patch that could sink a sleigh or break a runner. The crew moved slow and steady, tipping barrels, watching water steam and freeze on contact. Fingers went numb, faces stung, but the work could not wait. Without these midnight hours, there would be no road for the timber to move, no way for the teamsters to haul their loads when the sun finally rose. Most never saw these men at work, but every log that made it out of the woods owed something to the ones who built the road while the world slept. The water crew lead, a man whose name seldom made the ledgers, walked the route with a measuring pole in hand, tapping the ice to gauge its thickness. 2 feet was the target, thick enough to carry 100 tons of timber in a single load, but only if every inch was solid and true. Each layer of water had to freeze before the next could be added. Rushing the job meant disaster. A weak spot could send a sleigh, horses and all, crashing through to the mud below. So the crew moved in a slow procession, careful and quiet, each man watching the one ahead for signs of trouble. As the ice built up, another team followed with rut cutters, heavy iron blades set to carve grooves 7 feet apart, matching the width of the sleigh runners. The grooves were more than just guides. They kept the loads from sliding sideways on descents, holding the timber steady even when the road shone like polished glass. Every pass of the cutter was checked by lantern light, the foreman running gloved fingers along the groove to feel for rough spots or thin ice. Sometimes the cold would fight back, splitting the surface with sharp cracks that echoed through the trees. The men would pause, listening for the telltale sound of water beneath the ice, then patch the weak spot with another layer, working until their faces burned and their breath turned to frost. By morning, the road would gleam, hard as stone, and ready for the weight of the day. It was a quiet kind of triumph, one built not on muscle, but on patience and precision, every foot of ice a testament to the crew's stubborn resolve. A teamster's day started in the hush before dawn, long before the main camp stirred. He moved through the cold barn, checking harnesses by lantern light, his breath mingling with the horse's breath in the frozen air. Each animal had a name and a temperament, and the teamster knew them all: the steady lead mare, the nervous gelding, the old brute who would pull until his legs gave out. There was no room for mistakes. A single team could be 10 or 12 horses strong, all harnessed in pairs, their collars buckled snug to keep out the cold. He ran his hands along their legs, checking for ice or injury, rubbing warmth into stiff muscles before the day's first haul. The routines were as rigid as the weather. Feed, water, harness, then out to the sleds, where the loads waited, sometimes as much as 20 tons of timber stacked high and ready to move. The teamsters worked in pairs, guiding the horses with low words and gentle hands. Twice a day, every day, they made the trip from the cutting site to the river landing, sleigh runners hissing over ice roads built by the midnight crews. Each haul was a test of patience and trust. The horses leaned into their collars, muscles bunching under shaggy winter coats, while the men walked alongside, boots crunching in the snow, watching for weak spots or hidden ruts. Breaks were brief, a handful of oats, a rub down, then back to work. There was a quiet pride in the way the teamsters handled their animals. Every trip was a partnership, built on years of shared hardship. Accidents could happen in a heartbeat, but most days passed in a rhythm as old as the pines themselves. When dusk finally settled, the teams returned to the barn, steaming and spent, ready to do it all again the next day. Ice roads, for all their promise, held dangers just beneath the surface. Every teamster knew the risk was not just in the bitter cold or the weight of the load, but in what lay underfoot. Horses left more than hoofprints behind. Each pile of manure melted into the ice, softening patches that could turn solid ground into a trap. A weak spot, hidden beneath a dusting of snow, could swallow a runner or send a sleigh crashing through to the slush below. There were stories of loads vanishing in a blink, of teams scrambling to unhook horses as timber and iron plunged into the muck. Some nights, swampers walked the first mile of road with shovels, scraping manure before it had a chance to do its damage. Even the most careful crew could not catch every spot. Teamsters moved with a kind of nervous respect, boots laced tight and eyes scanning for the telltale shimmer of thin ice. Horses wore spiked shoes, sharp-shod for grip, but even metal could slip if the road gave way. The sound of cracking ice sent hearts pounding. A single misstep, and a team could end up floundering in freezing water, men and animals fighting for footing as the load threatened to pin them down. No one forgot the cold, but the memory of a lost team or a sunken sleigh lingered longer. The system depended on vigilance. Every trip was a gamble, every mile a test. The men trusted the road, but only as far as they could see and hear. When the cracks grew louder and the risks piled up, the old ways started to feel fragile. Something sturdier, something more reliable than muscle and luck was needed if the work was to go on through the worst of winter. Alvin Lombard was a blacksmith from Maine, and he saw the winter woods with a different kind of imagination. Where others saw endless snow and misery for horses, he saw a problem that needed a machine. In 1901, his answer rumbled to life: the Lombard steam log hauler. It looked like a locomotive had wandered off the rails and into the wild, with a boiler in back, skis up front, and a set of steel tracks that chewed through snow and ice. Weighing in at nearly 20 tons, the hauler was a beast built for the cold. It could pull a train of sleds, sometimes over 1,000 feet long, loaded with enough timber to shame a whole stable of horses. The crew was small but essential. At the very front, out in the open, stood the steersman. He clung to the levers, guiding the skis and bracing against the wind, smoke, and cinders that the boiler threw back. Behind him, the engineer and fireman worked in the cab, feeding wood or coal into the belly of the boiler, sweating even as the world outside froze solid. Farther back, riding the last sled, the conductor kept watch on the load and signaled with a bell rope or wire when something was wrong. 4 men, each with a job that could not wait for better weather. The Lombard's tracks were its secret, chain-driven, flexible enough to grip the slickest ice, heavy enough to dig in and keep moving when horses would have balked or broken down. It rolled at a steady 4 miles an hour, dragging up to 24 sleds at a time, sometimes more than 200 tons of timber in a single run. The first time its whistle echoed through the woods, rival camps stopped to listen, Some cheered, others worried about their jobs, but nobody doubted what they saw. Steam had come to the forest, and nothing would ever be quite the same. Horses still waited in the barns, but now there was a new kind of power on the road, one that did not shiver in the cold or spook at the crack of ice. The Lombard hauler offered a glimpse of a future where muscle and luck might finally have a worthy rival. January 1901 brought a blizzard to northern Maine that erased the familiar world in a single night. Snow hammered the camps, driven by winds that shook bunkhouse walls and howled through the pines. By midnight, Eagle Lake's camp was sealed in, doors blocked by drifts, men digging their way out just to breathe the sharp frozen air. Horses stood shivering in the dark, their breath rising in clouds, eyes rolling at every gust. Men trying to reach the barn vanished waist-deep after a few steps, lanterns swallowed by swirling white. The ice roads, built up night after night by water crews, disappeared in hours. Sleds loaded with timber vanished beneath the drifts, runners locked tight, some never to be moved again. 10-horse teams strained to free a single load, but the storm left monuments of frozen wood scattered across the cut. Inside, the bunkhouse grew tense. The cook's fire, usually a steady comfort, sputtered and smoked as wind forced its way down the chimney and threatened to snuff it out. Men crowded close, voices low, listening for the groan of trees or the crash of snow sliding from the roof. Outside, the water crew fought to keep the camp connected. Wrapped in every scrap of wool and canvas, they stumbled through the whiteout, hauling barrels and buckets, searching for the lost road's edge. Fingers went numb in minutes, breath froze on scarves and eyebrows. They worked in pairs, shouting to be heard, sometimes losing each other in the storm. More than once, a man was dragged back to camp half frozen, his face as pale as the snow. Fires smothered unless fiercely tended. For 3 days, warmth came only from the press of bodies and the hope that the storm would break. When it finally eased, sleds were buried, horses wild-eyed, men exhausted. There was no pause. Roads had to be found, loads dug out, work begun again. The blizzard tested muscle, machine, and will. Winter, indifferent to invention or effort, always had the last word. The legacy of those winter loggers lives on in every engineered road, every innovation born of necessity. Today, forestry still faces brutal winters and evolving risks, but the drive to adapt remains unchanged. As climate extremes grow, resilience, once forged in -40 degrees Fahrenheit camps, matters more than ever. The toughest challenges still demand ingenuity and grit. What would you have done in their boots? Share your thoughts below.